Hello there, listeners of the Bylines Network podcast, and welcome to this very special collaboration with our friends north of the border in Scotland. Ronnie will be coming to you live from Embankment, where he is interviewing a group of very interesting people called Patriotic Millionaires. Take it away, Ronnie.
Hello and welcome to this special podcast from the Bylines Network and Bylines Scotland. I'm Ronnie Barbour. A few days ago, I got the invite to go and meet some millionaires. By the way, there should be a collective noun for a group of millionaires, something like a wedge or an affluence. Anyway, they have formed Patriotic Millionaires UK, PMUK, and they want the super rich taxed fairly to reflect their wealth. So I met up with them on a very windy day in Victoria Embankment. First millionaire up was Dale Vince, and I asked him if we should call it a wealth tax.
It's probably unfortunate to be calling anything, and this, let's say, is a good example of that, to call it a wealth tax, because immediately that sounds like taxing the rich, bashing the rich and that kind of stuff. And it's always been a kind of left-wing thing, isn't it, that we need to tax the rich more and that kind of stuff. And it does give the wrong impression, you're right, because really it's just about a bit more balance. So the idea here, for example, is a 2% tax on wealth over £10 million. That only affects 20,000 people, and it's £200,000 out of 10 million. They aren't going to miss it, right? They're not going to go short of anything, but it would raise £24 billion.
And what about the Labour government's apparent reluctance to tax the rich?
I'd say I'm a little bit disappointed. I think there's a massive mandate that Labour has. They need to do bold things because we're in a bit of a mess, actually. The economy's in a mess, and this isn't a time for tinkering around and being timid. You know, we need to do bold things. It's like the reaction of Europe right now to the war in Ukraine. There's no lack of boldness, no lack of big words and big actions, right? Why aren't we doing that back here? There are, I think, 30% of kids in our country living in poverty, food poverty. You know, there's all kinds of problems in our country. And there are a very few people with an incredibly large sum of money, and they don't need it all. And in fact, they paid less tax in the process of getting rich than somebody with a job.
I can remember the days when film actors would say it was 94% tax before your time, Dale. But I can remember they would clear off, and they did.
Yeah.
People have been threatening to clear off, but that won't happen, will it?
No, I don't think so. And the big difference here is not talking about increasing income tax. We're talking about increasing capital gains tax, the tax made with money, not with your job. So, you know, in your example, if you're an actor, you'd be unaffected unless you sat on £10 million or something like that. There's always a threat that people clear off. When capital gains went up in the last budget from 20% to 24%, there was a big hoo-ha, right-wing media again saying everybody's going to leave. 0.3% of millionaires in our country actually did leave. And I say, if you don't want to pay tax here, your fair share, then you should leave. You shouldn't be here. We don't want people freeloading, especially the richest among us. How can it make sense? We're better off without them.
Dale Vince. Next millionaire is Julia Davis.
My name's Julia Davis, and I'm one of the founding members of Patriotic Millionaires UK. So I'm here today to promote our message that we really need to start looking at taxing wealth, because, as you know, the news today is all about taxing cuts to people who are struggling. And we need to invest to support people if we want to give them the opportunities to get into work. And it's really, we're looking at this the wrong way around. So we have huge wealth in this country, and I'm now incredibly fortunate to be someone with wealth. So I know I can tell you that I could afford to pay more tax, and I would willingly pay more tax if it was going to address many of the problems that we're facing in this country at the moment. Our motivation behind the organisation is to say that wealth is where we have the money to invest in our public services and infrastructure, and we want to show that it's not intrinsic in being a wealthy person to want to avoid paying tax and investing in your country. You know, wealth doesn't get created. We're often told that people with wealth are wealth creators. Wealth gets moved around. And I was very fortunate to be involved in setting up a company. But the money that really came out of that was, you know, we were able to set that company up in the UK because of the tax that everybody pays, which invests in our state schools, in our health service, in making this a relatively safe place to live, you know, and all the fantastic employees and all the fantastic customers that bought our products. And that comes out of everybody's investment in the country. A millionaire and billionaire sound like the same things. They're very, very, very different. And one way of looking at it is 1 million seconds is equivalent to 11.5 days. 1 billion seconds is equivalent to nearly 32 years, right? Last time I looked, Elon Musk had $330 billion, right? That is the equivalent in seconds, 10,464 years. You can't even envisage that. Okay? No one needs that. And you know what? It's dangerous, someone having that. So we've just seen how dangerous that is. We are now in a situation where we have made life on Earth much more precarious through dangerous climate change. We're equally in a situation where we could make everything in the world way better for everybody, because we could move to clean energy, we could move to protecting our natural world, and that would be a better world for everyone. You know, that would be a world in which kids can go to school on a bus where they're not breathing in toxic fumes. We could live in a world where pensioners aren't worried about heating their homes because they've got solar on their roofs. You know, this is what money can pay for.
Julia Davis. Next up is Phil White, and I asked him if there really is a will to tax the rich.
You can if you choose to. I mean, we've had much higher taxes on wealthy people in the past, and we need to tax the rich because there's all that money sitting there actually really not helping with the kind of country that we need to grow.
Why are millionaires reluctant to pay their fair share?
I don't know. I don't understand why not, because frankly I've got money, I can afford to pay more tax, and I have an idea of the kind of country I want to live in, and that kind of country is not one where, you know, people are out on the streets because they can't afford somewhere to live, where we've got streets that, you know, have rubbish on, we've got high crime rates and so on. And to achieve that kind of country, we actually need a higher tax rate, and frankly, and that's got to be on the wealthy, because there's nowhere else it can come from now. So I guess we live with it.
I was trying to compare and contrast with European countries, and actually where tax of the rich is pretty low. I mean, the rest of the countries are actually pretty good at the wealthy tax.
Yeah, I mean, some countries have wealth taxes, some countries don't, and so on, but actually there's no evidence that they do any damage, which is what the kind of pushback we get when we want to introduce a wealth tax here.
Why do you think there is a reluctance then to pay more tax?
That's a very interesting question. I'm not sure there's a single answer. I guess some of it is that people see that it's their money that they don't want to give away. And, you know, we hear a lot of talk about, you know, self-made people and all those things. Personally, I think that's rubbish. I don't think anybody is self-made, actually. To succeed in any kind of modern, you know, economic environment, you actually need customers, you need infrastructure, you need public services, all those good things that need paying for. So I think this whole idea of this is my money and I want to keep it is actually fallacious. I think also we're not always as good as we are about the benefits of paying tax. There's a rhetoric around about tax is a bad thing, we need to minimise tax, rather than actually saying, you know, these are things we could do if we contributed more. And so if you go into a shop, you know, you go into a shop to buy something, you don't go into a shop to minimise the amount of money you spend. And, you know, a country is very much the same kind of thing. If we want things, we can pay for them and we can create a better place. And actually, I think what's really important to people is that environment they live in. It's the health service, it's the public services and so on. London's a great city, but it's public infrastructure.
Last millionaire is Gareth Bayliss, and I began by asking him if he really thinks that millionaires are prepared to pay more tax.
Yeah, I think certainly you know, everybody who's part of PM UK feel that way. But even if I go beyond that, I think people would happily pay a reasonable amount of tax. I think they would understand paying a small amount of wealth tax would be, you know, something that they would be happy to do if actually it was asked for. But it's not being asked for, and therefore, you know, they give to charities and they do their own things, but they're not giving anything direct to the state. And I think there's an element of fairness as well. It's like, I think there's people who go, well, you know, I'm happy to pay if others like me are expected to pay as well.
Yes.
So I think there is that element. I also think there's maybe something that could be done around, you know, talking about it as the patriotic thing to do. Actually, we publish the Forbes rich list or something, but how about, you know, these are the top 100 taxpayers in the UK, and you know, aren't they, shouldn't we be saying, oh, well done, thanks for contributing so much to the when you could have been avoiding it. Whether that's possible or not, I don't know.
What about the mindset, though, that it is some kind of punitive thing for rich people? You know, we've got money, so we're going to punish you. Like, do you think that's a mindset?
I think what puts people off more the idea, and this is more the general public, is actually, oh well, yeah, but if they've earned it, and therefore they shouldn't be taxed twice in it. But reality is, for most wealthy people, they didn't earn it, and they've a lot of people have inherited it. Some, yes, they built a company many years ago, but then most of their wealth tends to be what they've made since then, because they had all this wealth, and then the rate of that which that accelerates is pretty huge. So I think that idea needs to be challenged, because in reality they didn't earn most of that money.
Tell me about the levels of taxation then, because it wouldn't just be one lot. You wouldn't go, right, if you go over the 5 million threshold, you're all paying 60% tax. There would be a gradation thing going on.
The proposal on the table at the moment is to tax wealth of those with more than £10 million. So it's to say, right, 2% tax on that each year is what you'd pay. So that hits about 20,000 individuals in the UK. If I think about, the kind of returns as a wealthy person you'd expect to make on your money, you're thinking, well, I'm easily going to make 7 or 8% a year. That's not even trying. So having 2%, it's like my wealth is still going to grow by 5 or 6% a year, which is, if you're a multi-millionaire, is plenty to have a very nice life on. And the trouble is we're then competing for the same assets as those with less wealth. So the poor in society, find house prices getting farther and farther out of their reach because the wealthy are buying them all because they've got money, and it's like, so we end up buying all those assets. That then crowds out the people who don't have that kind of money.
I asked Julia earlier on, and I said, as somebody who's not a millionaire, when is enough enough? Do you ever think, you look at your bank account and say, well, that's fine. I'm fine now. I think good thinking people, good people will look at it and say, yeah, look, I'm sorted. I've got a great lifestyle now. I don't need to make another 10, 15 million. Is that a thought that goes through your mind? I've looked at my bank account. I'm fine.
Yeah. I mean, for me personally, I'd say yes. I retired 3 months ago, so I essentially got to the point where I went, all right, I'm fine. I can now, live off this until I die, kind of happily. So for me, yes. But do I think most people think that way? Not in the crowds I move around in. No, actually. Most of my colleagues, because I worked at Microsoft, most of my colleagues actually have got more money than I have, but they don't.
Is that a fear?
They're still going.
Is that a fear factor? Is it just suddenly there's going to be this huge tax come in? Donald Trump's going to say, right, or whatever, we want this, we want half of your earnings.
No, it's not that. For most of them, it's actually, they want to continue their career doing things, and they're like, hang on, if I don't have this, what would I spend my time in? There's a lot of stories as well about once you retire, you're often dead within a few years when you retire from these senior executive positions, which is kind of the world that I came from. And for me, it was so one of the things that that's what I had to think about. It's like, okay, well, now I'm going to have all this time. What do I want to do with that time? Now I need to look after my family, and there's lots of things I want to do there, which is one of the reasons why I kind of called time on it now. But being able to invest time into PM UK is part of what I've decided to try and do with my time.
Gareth Bayliss. Well, that's it for this special podcast from the Bylines Network and Bylines Scotland. I'm Ronnie Barbour, and I'll leave the last word to Dale Vince.
What we are, apart from me, is a group of kind of crazy lefties saying tax the rich, right? What we are is a group of very rich people saying, we can afford to pay more. We all should pay more.
Thank you very much for joining us for this very special episode, listeners of the Bylines Network podcast, with thank you to Ronnie for conducting the interview and to Patriotic Millionaires for their time. And now, listeners, I leave you with this question. What should a collective for millionaires be? Please leave your comments on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. See you soon, where Chris and I will be talking about the recent welfare reforms.